A lot of people don't realize that what you said there is a trillion% true, and a lot of people left don't realize that. We analyze people as classes, as we should. It's the only way we can. But individuals don't interpret things as a class, right? If you tell a white person, like, there is no such thing as black on white racism, from a class point of view, that's kind of true. Like, black people as a class of people in the United States don't really have the same power that white people do. But if you're just an individual white guy and, you log into Twitter and everybody's saying, like, here comes the Mayo side, fuck whiteys, kill white people, fuck blah, 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 no whites allowed. It's like, well, that individual is not going to feel their class privilege as a white person. They're just going to feel like they're being fucking racist against. Like, that's the individual interpretation. And a lot of people seem to miss that. They think that, like, individuals will interpret things as entire classes. And that's just ridiculous. It's just not how any of that works.
Cool. We're good to go.
All right.
Yeah. So basically, I wanted to hit you up to ask you questions. I'd actually seen some stuff you've done. I've been a fan for a minute. And yeah, I guess I wanted to touch on subjects relating to dating, consent, things like that. So that's pretty much the gist of it. But I guess I'll probably just pop off with a few questions and we'll just kind of go from there. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you guys had a lengthy stream in regards to, I believe it was consent and could have been power dynamics. I could be wrong.
Are you talking about the one that I just very recently did with Filthy Robot?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of voices, a lot of stuff going on. But there's some interesting stuff that came up, especially towards the end. I thought there was some good topical stuff. So I want to kind of have you expand on that a little bit. But you felt like in regards to dating and making people feel comfortable.
Wait, people in my chat, I don't know how they found you, but they said that your stream is muted right now. There's no sound on your YouTube stream.
Let me fix that here. All right, can you guys hear me now in the chat? The chat just went crazy. I don't know how you guys do it, where you just see hundreds of people. Do you guys turn on slow chat or some shit?
I think it's kind of like, do you play a lot of video games?
Yes. Well, relatively. Definitely.
Yeah, you're used to seeing what's on the screen. If an older person were to watch you play like a first-person shooter and you like flick your mouse to shoot at somebody and you're like, how do you even see that guy? You're just used to it, I think. Like when you stream for so long, when people start pinging my name in chat, like I'm used to just kind of like glancing over and looking at it and seeing what they're screaming at me for. So.
All right, we'll give a shout out to your chat. They good looking out. That helped me out a lot because I was not looking at my chat, so I would have completely ignored that for a hot minute. So thank you to them. But yeah, so you said something I thought was really interesting, where you said, especially when you're about to engage in any kind of sexual encounter with somebody, you want to create an environment where they feel like there's no consequences for saying no.
Yeah,
correct?
It's like a little consent trick or something, I guess you'd say. Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit? When you say there's no consequences for saying no, what do you mean by that?
So I think. I don't know. So I'm just going to assume I'm going to start all this conversation from ground zero. And if I'm over explaining anything, let me know. Okay. Cool. So I guess basically the way that I look at this is for a real life example. If I go out on a date with a girl and at the end of the date, if my goal is to get laid, something that I might, so this is like a situation that could come up. Okay. I wanted to go further physically. I don't know if the other person wants to. If you're the guy, oftentimes for me, I'm usually the one driving. If you both get into the car at the end of the evening and you either have to drive to her place to drop her off or drive home to your place. Wait, everybody in your chat now is spamming that there's a huge echo. Uh-oh.
Okay, if you don't have it on your end, I'll just assume it's something that I'm fucking up on my end. So
are you using headphones or speakers?
I'm using headphones. I'm not a complete noob. What I'm assuming, okay, I know what it is.
You might have the voice doubled somewhere, or?
Yeah, it's probably in one of the audio outputs. So let's see if that fixes it. But yeah, just carry on.
Yeah, gotcha. So at the end of the day, you're deciding which place to drive back to. If you pose the question, hey, in kind of a singular manner, like, hey, do you want to come back to my place? Sometimes the person might not necessarily feel comfortable saying no because they don't know if it's going to like start a fight or put them in a weird spot. So sometimes people might just say yes, even if they're not 100% on board, and maybe they think they can get out of something later or whatever. Instead of having people like presented in situations like that, I think usually it's good to give somebody an alternative. So I might say like, hey, do you want to come over to my place or do you have something going on tomorrow? And then that gives them, if they don't want to, it's like an easier out for them. Like, oh, like I've got something in the morning. Like, yeah, if you could take me back to my place, that'd be cool. I find that like that's like one example, but like usually having people offered alternatives usually puts them in like a better state of mind to where they don't feel as pressured for something, and then if they don't want to, they've got like an easier way out of something without feeling like they're going to have a fight over it if they say otherwise.
Right. Okay, yeah, and I imagine you feel like you might need to go that extra mile because you imagine people might feel all kinds of pressures in regards to feeling the need to say yes. Correct?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. When you say try to not have consequences, here's something that's interesting. So, hypothetical situation, but let's say you go under the guise of you're potentially going to sleep with somebody. You guys have discussed it. All right. Come the day of, you want to drive back to the place. Girl says, no, I'm not interested. Now, in my head, if girl says no, she's not interested, that's fine. We can just cut the date there and it's okay. But obviously, I think there's still room for consequence in that regards, in the idea that, like, even though I won't guilt trip somebody, you know, I won't be like, oh, what the fuck, you know. I might also be like, well, this is not what we talked about the whole night, but if you don't want to do it, that's okay. I still think there is some measure of consequence when you say no to something, irrespective of whether that person pressures you or not, because it does change the mood a little bit. Am I incorrect in saying so?
Yeah, which I think is fine. If you want to, like, fuck, I thought we were going to fuck tonight. That sucks. But when I say, I guess when I'm talking consequence, I'm referring more to, like, is there going to be, like, some incredibly adverse consequence? So, for instance, if the person says no, am I going to sit there and try to argue with them? Am I going to get, like, am I going to be like, oh, well, fuck you, find your own ride home, bitch. Like, I'm done. And, like, they don't have money for an Uber, some other fuck. Like, those are the kinds of consequences I think. In terms of, like, you being, like, salty or sour that, like, oh, fuck, I'm not going to get what I wanted. Like, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Like, you can feel, like, shitty, like, oh, fuck, you know?
Yeah, no.
As long as you don't, like, take it out on the other person, yeah.
Yeah, I think especially if you be like, oh, I thought tonight was gonna be like, yeah. Then I think at that point the person starts to feel guilt tripped into something.
Yeah, you don't want to go. Yeah.
No. I've had girls try to pity fuck me before, and I'm like, I'll pass.
Sure.
I think oftentimes consent, and I don't know if consent is the right word. I think people don't want to feel like they're coerced into situations. I don't know if that's necessarily always linked to consent, but sometimes pressure comes into play. And I think what I wanted to ask you about was more so, what do you think is, like, contributing to so many of the problems that we have today in regards to that lack of communication, where we're not able to
I think
have
that's
those environments?
Yeah, I think that's a really complicated question, and I don't think that there's any one. I guess, like, I would say broadly, if I'm going to take a feminist approach, I would say broadly, I would just blame patriarchy. And then I would say there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath that, where there's a whole bunch of different parties that can kind of, like, come under question here, or have some responsibility for this. So if I were to balance out, like, an attack on both sides, right? If I say here's a criticism for both sides, I would say that men have a problem here because sometimes it feels like men have this ownership or entitlement over a woman, like they're like a pussy slot machine. Like, if I put in enough stuff, it should come out at the end. Like, if I buy you dinner and I drive you or whatever, like, you kind of owe me sex. Like, I did this for you. Like, now you have to do something for me. I feel like there's an entitlement part on men there that's very not healthy. That needs to not be the case. From the other end, I would argue that when you set up situations where men are unilaterally expected to make the first move over and over and over and over again, and no woman ever has the courage to say anything, and sometimes women turn down men because they feel like it's what to do, you're naturally setting yourself up for situations where, like, okay, well, eventually some guy is going to take this too far. Like, if it's constantly on men to always make the first move, and we have to do this over and over and over again, like, somebody's going to overstep their boundaries. Like, it's going to happen. That's inevitable. So, like, you know.
Okay, so that's already interesting right there. So you said that there's an expectation because the men, that's the first thing you said, because the men did something for the women, they're expecting something in return, correct? Is the problem the idea that they expect something in return, or is the issue with the fact that if they don't get what they expected, then they turn toxic? Or then they stop being considerate of what the other person's wants and needs are?
Yeah, I would say more specifically that you stop having any consideration for the other person because you're not getting what you want out of them.
Okay. Yeah, no, on that point I agree. And the thing on the men are expected to make the first move, I agree that that's an issue. I also just don't believe that women will ever want to get to a place where they're forced to make first moves and put themselves out there.
I mean, that has to happen eventually. It has to happen.
Do you believe it will?
I hope so. I can say prescriptively, like, we ought to do these things, but it's hard to know, it's really hard to know how much is baked into us in terms of, like, male, female stuff if we could reach that point. So, I mean, I'll push for it as much as possible. It might be after, like, 50 years, like, okay, hold on, women are actually incapable of doing this thing. I don't know if I believe that. I think they probably are. But, I mean, obviously, all of these types of things are hard to say, like, how far could we push for things to work versus, like, this will never happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think those things are very seeped in gender roles in regards to, you know, I hate using these terms, but, like, in terms of the market for women and the market for men. I feel like ladies don't have to feel that sense of desperation the way men do. And so oftentimes that need to approach comes from the fact that women can't afford to sit back because it works in their favor. And if there's not a built-in need, then I don't see the reason why they would go out there for themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's part of like changing. Hopefully slowly we have to change the culture on that. Because like,
Okay.
and I think some parts of the culture can change, and some things like need to. Like there's because in some ways women are moving in like awesome strides, but they still have some like archaic views of like dating, which is like really shitty sometimes. So like the easiest go-to example of this, for instance, is like women are out graduating men now in school, and a lot of women are earning more and more money as they graduate and they get better jobs in the marketplace. However, women are still not willing to date down in income, generally speaking. Everything I say is a generalization based on polling data, right? Yeah. Right. So like that's awesome that women are working now, and that's awesome that women, are earning as much as men in some areas, but they're still not willing to date down in income, which men are. So like that unbalance there or imbalance like creates like weird distortionary effects on like dating markets and whatnot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that's related to this. Oh, I'm sorry. I caught this on Twitter once that really triggered the fuck out of me, and I made a response. I have to be really careful when I talk about these things because I can either come off as an incel or an ultra feminist depending on who's listening. But I think, do you know who Tommy Lauren is?
Yes.
Tommy Lauren made this huge or not twit. It was like a 3-minute video or whatever, not a huge thing. But she made this thing where she was complaining about all these loser men. She's like, I've got my shit together. I've got a career. What's up with all these loser men that have barely graduated college? They don't have anything going on in their lives. They don't have any career. They don't have any job, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, damn, well, that describes like 99% of women that men were usually willing to date before, but like that's not enough for you now as a woman with a career. Because prior to that, for a lot of men, they just needed a woman to be pretty and be able to take care of the house, and now you're even though you are now in a position that men were, you're not willing to let men slide into the position that women were, right? You're upping and upping and upping your expectations, and that like mismatch I think is really unhealthy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this really comes down to the idea that as much as we advance as a society in a lot of different ways, some things still stay very archaic in regards to, I might want my money and I want to be able to make as much money as possible, but I also I do like the idea of being provided for. I do like the idea of still being protected. I still like the idea of someone being taller, stronger, or bigger than me, because as much as I may advance in a lot of ways, there's still some parts of me that are like very dinosaur brain in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of reasons for that to be really ingrained in us. But I just question whether or not we're ever going to want to get to that point where we're going to want to abandon these roles despite the fact that our social circumstances are changing. Like as much as we want to tell us that's necessary, and I agree with you, it'd be wonderful if we wouldn't want to do that. But it's hard for me to encourage people to do something that, one, potentially will hurt their self-esteem tremendously, and two, they don't necessarily have to do because of the way the market works for them as a whole. I agree that for women who make a tremendous amount of money, they've got their own separate specific set of issues, but for most women, like, they don't have to worry about that nearly as much.
I mean, yeah, but like, I think it'd be good to balance it out because maybe it gives people more empathy for both sides too. I'm sure you must have had multiple cringy moments in your life where white people are trying to explain racism to you or some shit, right? And you're just thinking like, oh my God, like you have no idea, I've had moments like this where like you talk to women or whatever, and it's really funny because I've talked to multiple women about this where I'll say like, hey, you should fucking make the first move sometimes. It's bullshit. You rely on us to do all the time. And like women will unironically say some shit where they're like, do you know, like, oh my God, could you imagine like doing that and getting turned down? Like how humiliating and embarrassing. And I'm like, yeah, like, wait, what the fuck? Like, yeah, of course I know what that feels like. What are you talking about? Yeah, so I mean, I think having that experience on both ends, I think would make it more positive for everybody. Like, kind of spread the empathy around and everything,
I think empathy is very easy to engage in when you don't have to put your self-esteem on the line. It's easy for me to sit there and be like, I sympathize with you because this is what you go through. But sympathizing is not the same as empathizing. Putting yourself in actually going through the similar experiences that they would go through is a very difficult thing, especially if that experience means, I might get rejected and this will devastate me. Because at the end of the day, someone saying no to you, whether you're a man or a woman, is going to hurt. But for women who don't necessarily have to put themselves out there as much, they're like, why would I put myself through that? There's like no reason. It's unnecessary. So while I agree with you, it's good. And I do think it would be good. I just don't think people would want to do it for self-preservation purposes.
Hopefully, I mean, all I can say is I hope we get there. Like, I think that some things are capable of changing. when it comes to like sexual stuff too, like so something that like was very crazy to me is like in high school, like getting sex out of women is a massive fucking game, or at least in the United States, or at least where I was growing up. Like there is a whole bunch of shit that goes into like trying to fuck somebody. But I noticed that once you got to college and the women were like a bit more sexually liberated, that you didn't have like, there's still like dumb shit that happens in college, but it was a way more straightforward process. And it kind of blew my mind. And I was like, oh shit, like some women just enjoy fucking, you know? Like it doesn't have to be this huge game where you're trying to get something out of somebody that is like guarding it from you, you know? Like, and I would hope that like that kind of idea could be more broadly applied to society, that as women become a little bit more sexually liberal, you don't have these same like huge imbalances in marketplaces of like all the men chasing the sex and the women being the sex gatekeepers, and that can kind of ease over time would be the goal or the hope, I would say.
A lot of people, when you say stuff like that, a lot of people bring up the idea of like, well, there's a certain biological aspect where, irrespective of what we may want, women still have that. I don't know how scientifically accurate that is, but I've heard it so many times, so I'm just repeating it. But basically, because of their wiring, they want to engage in that kind of gatekeeping because it's in their best interest due to whatever risks, whether it be pregnancies or things like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that to some extent, there's going to be some truth to this. Like there are biological realities that we're always going to have to contend with. You can't ignore that. Right. I think that like the most important thing that I learned in doing more like biology research is, I think that one thing we need to wipe from our minds is like nature versus nurture. This is something that we hear repeated a lot, and it's like the strange dichotomy that we have built up, but it's not really true. There's no such thing as nature versus nurture. Like genes always have to express themselves in an environment. So the question is just like, how much can we like change the expression of a particular gene or phenotype or something in a particular environment. Now, it might be the case that there's some stuff that's just so hardwired into us, it's not really going to be able to change that much, you know? Like, it might be the case that even in a perfect egalitarian society, maybe 75% of men are programmers and 25% of women are programmers, or of all the programmers, 75% are men, 20%. That might just be like something that's baked into us. But I think a lot of these things are kind of malleable socially in ways that I don't think we're there yet, where we're like, oh yeah, we've tried everything we can, like we just have to throw our arms up and give up, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as long as we can remove as much of those social factors as possible, then I think that is good for all of us. And who knows what society's going to look like? I mean, I'm sure our parents didn't imagine us being like this where we are right now. So,
yeah, of course. And I think something really important on that too is like, I think the way that you know you're getting closer is like how you see how people feel about the feelings they have. Like, so for instance, if we reached a society where we thought we did everything we could and we ask a woman, like, why aren't you having as much sex as you could be? Like, men are so much more hungrier. And the woman is like, I just don't really feel it that much. Then it's like, oh, okay, maybe we are actually reaching like some equilibrium here and men do desire more. But when you still have a society where so many women say things like, I don't know, like I'm kind of ashamed of like masturbating, or I kind of feel like gross about my own body. Like I feel like I shouldn't really like these things because of my upbringing. Then it's like, well, okay, maybe we have a little bit more room to wiggle here, where it's not like some biologically hard-baked thing. It's more like the influences that we have growing up are kind of pushing women towards these feelings about sex.
I want to be that optimistic. I just think, considering the dating market, like I know that for a woman to approach a man and to ask him out, and like the likelihood of it being successful compared to a man's experience of asking a woman out, like just knowing how much better odds that they have, and they still don't want to even take a small chance, it makes me slightly discouraged that outcome may happen. But one can always hope. But I want to pivot to something a little bit different, but actually what we started out on originally. But you felt like because of the way gender roles are set up, as a result of that plays into a lot of the issues that we have in terms of consent, correct? You said, just to be sure, because I asked you how we can fix consent, and you kind of went into this dating parameters of how like men are meant to ask women all the time. That was one of your things. What were some of the other things that you think contributes to our issues with being able to have clear and concise consent and things like that?
I mean, there's so many different things. I would say that like, so one was men being expected to ask first on everything is probably bad. I think that the ownership or entitlement that men feel to women's bodies sometimes feels like a little strange. Like, here's a really good example of this. I can say specifically to Twitch, every single person can benefit from a woman's nudity except for that actual woman before people start to call them sluts and like go crazy about it. So as an example of this, like I can play video games that have female sex scenes in them, male-female sex scenes in them, and everybody is like, PogChamp, this is awesome, like The Witcher, Cyberpunk, you can fuck people, this is so sick, and everybody's cool with it. But if you were to take the very same woman from one of those sex scenes and then she was to do a stream on Twitch, now it's like, what the fuck, you fucking whore, what are you doing out here? This is disgusting, what's wrong with you, right? Where like, it seems like every part of theory, every person is able to benefit from or enjoy like those kind of sex acts. But when the woman herself is in charge, like, hold on, well, fuck you. I don't think you're allowed to do this, you know? So I think we have like a lot of weird ideas in our head about like who has like the ownership over like women's sexuality. You still see a lot of, in my opinion, very fucking weird ownership over like the sexualness of your daughter, where, you know, fathers will say things like, you know, like, oh, I'm not gonna let my daughter be with a guy like that. And it's like, that's really fucking weird how you're so obsessed with who your daughter is dating or whatever. Like, I think that's kind of creepy. But that's still like pretty normalized in a lot of parts of the country. So that part is one thing. Yeah, go for it.
I want to push back. So I mean, I feel like mothers are quite involved in their sons' dating lives in regards to who they're dating. Do you feel like that comes from a very different place?
I don't feel like it's the same type of guardianship at all. Like, I don't feel like, and a lot of this might be subjective. You feel free to disagree if you feel like you have different experiences. I feel like you could view your daughter as getting like ruined by certain types of relationships, especially sexual ones, but we don't really feel the same way about like boys or men, where like if you date like the wrong type of person, like, you know, having sex with this many people can like ruin you or make you kind of like worth less, or you're compromising yourself. Like, you know, like we tell our sons to be careful, but like for our daughters, it's like, you know, this is like actually disgusting bad behavior that you can engage in. I think there's a difference there, is how I would view it.
There's definitely a difference, but I think the difference are justified in regards to some of the risks that daughters or women will have in a dating situation. You know, like if your daughter's dating the wrong dude and you see it happening in front of you, aside from like some of the extremes would be abuse or whatever, all that stuff. I mean, you have to consider like getting somebody pregnant, you know? If your daughter gets pregnant, especially with the wrong dude, of course, that's going to have way worse implications, as it's often the men who run out on the women rather than the women who run out on the men. So she will be left stuck with a baby in a bad situation. So I think a lot of those protectiveness is very justified in regards to just acknowledging like, yo, women who date with the wrong people, whether it be violence, whether it be finances, whether it be children and stuff like that, their risks are way higher.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I want to believe you, and then in other ways, I'm not sure how much of this ends up becoming like a cope for the parent, because like we say things like that, but it's like, so like if our primary concern was like, you know, them getting pregnant, well then the correct response would be like, hey, like we need to do something about birth control. But that's not usually what it is, right? It's usually a little bit more controlling than that. It feels like it's a little bit more sexually oriented than just like pure outcome oriented. But again, I'm from Nebraska, like that might be my experience in hearing things. I also went to private school. Yeah, go for it.
I just want to understand, like when you say it's more sexually oriented, what do you mean? Like how is that control more sex focused?
Because
in regards to like allowing their daughters to just fuck people versus their sons who like, you could fuck anyone, but then their daughters like, be a good girl. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of like that thing. It's like that wink, wink, nudge, nudge from like a parent or whatever, like in terms of like their son's sexual behavior and exploration. But for a girl, it's like gross and not okay. Or like the person's value is more tied into like, and then like more broadly speaking culturally, right? You even have jokes where it's like a lock that's opened by any key is a shitty lock, but a key that can open any lock is a master key, you know, like where the promiscuous dicks are awesome, but the promiscuous vaginas are just like, you know, stretched out sluts, you know, like that type of idea I think is still pretty pervasive in society.
Okay, I would concede on that point in regards to those differences there. Maybe there are better solutions in regards to not necessarily being controlling of the sex life, but I think in general, if you asked me as a parent, would I be more protective of my son than my daughter? I'd probably say no. I'd probably be more protective of my daughter, just recognizing the reality of the world that we live in, right? Like,
yeah, but I think that like, and a lot of this stuff is cyclical, like it feeds back into itself. So like, I wouldn't necessarily say somebody's wrong there, but like that, even from the very start, right? That type of modeling where our sons are free to kind of explore and do what they want and be their own men in the world, and daughters need to be like a little bit more protected and cherished more, like that will feed into their view later in life where it's like, okay, well, I'm looking for a partner. I need somebody that earns more than me, that's better than me, that can take care of me, you know, that's going to make the first move and kind of take control of me, because that's like the modeling that I've been given for my entire life too. And again, I'm not saying that like it's wrong as a parent to do that, because all of these things play into each other. But like, I can see how like a lot of this feeds into itself and sets itself up to play out the same way in the future, you know?
I would agree with that. Yeah, it's hard to, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Is it like the fact that society's just, women are just more vulnerable as a result of like just living within groups, and that's inherent, and so therefore the resulting behavior is always going to be there? Or is the resulting behavior making us more protective, which is making us go down certain rabbit holes, which is perpetuating certain ideas? It's hard to tell which one comes before the other.
Yeah, a really good example I can give of this is like makeup and the crazy filtering that's going on Instagram these days. I don't know if like if an average man even knows what an average woman looks like even anymore. Like there are so many guys where you can show them pictures of women. It's like, oh, I like this woman who's wearing no makeup, and it's like, dog, she has fucking makeup on. Like you're crazy. Like, you don't even know what an old person looks like anymore, right? And I would say that like men and women both feed into this. But for me to tell a woman like, listen, bro, you got to stop with all this shit. I'm essentially asking her to martyr herself, because if she does stop with the crazy filtering and the makeup, well, now she's going to get made fun of on social media, and people are going to roast her saying like, oh my God, you look sick. You look disgusting. Like what the fuck is wrong with you, right? And it's the same thing with the father-daughter example. If I'm like, hey, listen, you need to give your daughter like more freedom, dude. Like you're way too overpossessive. Like this is crazy. And the dad's like, okay, fine. I'll let her explore more when she wants. And if she does that and then like gets raped, then it's like, oh, well, fuck you. You just fucked me. Like what the fuck? Why did I do this? I fucked up, you know? So these are all like, I'm trying to be careful of this. I know that like, no matter what I say, people are always going to hate me because I say I'm either an incel or a hardcore feminist. But I really do try to be careful when I present these. There's always two sides to all of these. None of this is easy. Accomplishing a world where all women are treated equally. I don't even know that's possible in terms of like the equal exchange and everything. But like none of this is easy. And I don't mean to present any of it as like, oh, we just have to do this and like everything will be fixed. Like I don't agree with that. Obviously, it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to how much security are you willing to give up for freedom.
Sure.
And one could believe that a lot of these security measures are put in place because of misogyny or because of like terrible ideas. But then like there's a good measure of it that's like, no, the world is just a bit of a fucked up place for ladies. And like, I don't know what else to do other than to put more burden on her, which is to some degree definitely unfair, but also I could understand it's necessary. But yeah, it's a tough discussion. It's a very tough discussion. Like you said, there is no one answer. I do agree with you that you can't just be like, well, you got to protect women. It's just that. Well, it's like, yeah, but you're also stifling her and you're priming her mindset to always view not only the world as necessarily hostile, but also to look for the things that she got from her family in her mates as well. And so that always going to be a perpetual cycle of like, I need it to be bigger. I need him to be taller because I need him to protect me. I'm like, when's the last time you got attacked, lady? Like, what are you expecting your mate to do? Like fend off muggers or some shit? Like what's going on? But it's so primed in us because of how we're raised in an environment. Like I've never thought of like having a girl who's going to protect me. You know what I mean?
Which is interesting. Yeah.
You know, even though men have just as many odds as like being attacked as a lady, like just in terms of like physical violence in regards to that. Like,
yeah, and then that leads into other weird areas too when we push that dichotomy. So there's a couple of like really funny videos online. I say funny, it's more sad, I guess, where you have like, if you are in public and you start like hitting a woman, dude, you're gonna get stopped 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times. Like no one is gonna like, people are gonna be like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Bro, I don't even want to go down this road.
Exactly.
Don't even bring down this road. Like the amount of times that I've talked about, like, I don't know if you've had this in your dating experiences, but the amount of times, like, listen, don't put your hands on women. That's a simple idea. Cool. The amount of times I've been in dating experiences and I've watched that, like, women's stimuli to like a frustrating situation or whatever is just like physical reactions has like boggled my mind. Like I've watched women be frustrated and just like slap my shoulder or like slap my back. I'm like, where did that come from? Like, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I would never think, but I also know the consequences of violence. Like you can go out to a club and slap a dude in the face and nothing's going to happen to you. But I know what it means if I slap, whether it be a man or a woman, I know what happens. I would never think of responding that way. And it's just been one of my biggest pet peeves because I bring it up and people are like, oh, you're being an incel. Why are you bringing it up? It's not that big of a deal. But I'm like, do you not recognize how these women who engage in this kind of behavior also prime young children when they exemplify this behavior in front of them? Like, if you show your kid that whenever you're frustrated, you hit somebody, whether it be light or aggressive, like, it's a bad lesson, and it's something that we perpetually do. I don't know. It's just...
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, obviously.
I get triggered by this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I was a victim of like pretty hardcore domestic abuse. Me and my my kid's mom had crazy living together situations. I was a stick back then. I weighed 105 pounds. She was like 145. So she was like, compared to me, she was a big person. I had to call the police 3 times to get her removed from the house. Every single time the cops showed up, they blamed me for the altercation. I was like, this is bullshit. And I just stopped calling. I just started taking pictures of like my fucking wounds instead. I was like, if I have to go to court, then we'll do this. But like, yeah, that shit like fucking blew my mind. Like they'd show me like, okay, well, because as soon as I'd be like, hey, like my girlfriend at the time, she's here, like I'm getting attacked, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, like what did you do to set her off? Like, what kind of fighting are you guys doing? Like, what did you say to her? Did you cheat on her? Did you blow? And it's like, no, wait, what the fuck? Like I called you guys here to help me. What the fuck is going on? Why am I getting fucking grilled on this? What the fuck? Whereas if the roles were reversed, I feel like I would have been fucking arrested and taken out fucking instantly. But yeah, I don't know. That always bothered the fuck out of me.
Bro, that shit like literally drove me towards like red pill stuff. Like,
yeah.
I remember being so jaded, and like anytime I brought it up, people would just gaslight the fuck out of me. And the only people I remember talking about like the fucking annoying shit that women would do were like red pill.
Red pill,
I'm like,
yeah.
And so then I would go like, that's like the one thing that people never want to acknowledge about that community. Like they are the only group of people who I remember at a young age would ever talk about the stuff that women do that I would encounter in my life. So of course I identified with them because I'm like, nobody else is talking about like the shit that I'm going through. And then obviously with time I got to see like some of the more toxic aspects of that community. But that's stuff that not only never gets talked about, but is also super confusing. Because I would remember like being 19 and having women like grope my junk, and I'm like, oh, this is just okay. So in my head I was like, cool. But then I would also hear online every day, a man groped me and it was fucked up. And I was like, huh? And then sometimes I would hear it from like women who self-identify as feminists and who believed in the idea of consent and stuff like that, and they got a little bit of liquor in them, and they were like completely fucked up. And I just remember being like so confused with the messaging, because it wasn't just the fact that like one individual did that, it was also the fact that if I would bring it up in conversations where these things should be dealt with and like addressed, it wouldn't be. So then I was like really thrown off by the whole messaging of like physical boundaries. I was like, what does that even mean? I was just confused as a man for sure.
Yeah, something that I try to focus on a lot is so like if we have like two sides to like types of claims we can make, we can talk about things that like describing the world as it is, and then describing things that we should do. I find that a lot of people that are more like socially liberal or left-leaning or whatever have a really hard time at just acknowledging certain realities of the world. And I think that hurts their argument a ton. And I think that's why you do get a lot of like very red-pilled people that will come out and kind of like basically get a bunch of people into these camps, because a lot of people that are more left-leaning social like are not willing to acknowledge certain things. Or they'll like saddle men with 100% of the blame. Or they'll say things like, oh, like, women never date men because of their income. The problem is you're just a nice guy incel. It's like, bullshit, dude. Women will fuck guys for their money all the fucking time. Why? And the problem is that when you're on the left and you lie about things like that, everybody looks at you and is like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I'm not going to believe anything you say if you're not going to acknowledge like things that I personally know are fucking true. And that drives me fucking crazy when people on the left are not willing to like say like, okay, listen, I disagree with everything the red pill guy is telling you to do, but a lot of what he brings up is true. Like there are ways that people select, sex partners or whatever, or girlfriend, boyfriend or whatever. Like some of these things are true, but like we should change the way that we view it, not just give into it completely,
Yeah. That was a tough thing for me for a while, because as I started talking about this stuff, the people were like, I would watch my chat or like the comments below, right? And I would see how much anger there was. People were kind of like, how do you feel about fostering so much like incel stuff? I'm like, if you listen to what I said, it wasn't that extreme. And people are like, yeah, I agree, but what are you fostering? I'm like, it's not me that's fostering that. It's the fact that the world has never addressed what these guys are going through. The fact that you can get on The View and laugh about some dudes getting his dick
chopped off in a fucking sink. I mean? Yeah, holy shit.
Like, you could talk about that and it's open and it's acceptable.
Oh man,
I'm not driving people towards like extremism. The world has been driving them towards that, and I just resonated with some of their struggles and they identified with me. That's what happened. I didn't have to say much. If you say anything like, hey man, sometimes women do some crazy stuff, dudes will get in the comments like, women ain't shit, women are whores. I'm like, bro, I didn't say all that. I
have the exact same fucking problem, because I have to be so fucking careful with what I say, because you do draw that crowd really quickly. Like for me personally, I don't really think that sexual content should be on Twitch. That's just not something that I'm comfortable with. I don't think it should be. But like I'll say some shit like that. I'll tweet out like, I don't really think Twitch should be a platform for sexual content. And I'll get all these people I mentioned, they're like, dude, fuck these whores wearing fucking these like tank top shit. Like, whoa, that's not what I was talking about. I'm not talking about a girl playing Call of Duty in a fucking tank top showing some cleavage. Like that is way far away. And you have to be so careful on like because that's why I said at the beginning multiple times, like depending on who you are when you listen to me, I'm either like a hardcore lib cuck simp, or I'm like an insane fucking degenerate Nazi incel. Like people go crazy on that. I remember I was on a late night podcast a few months ago, and you think that female genital mutilation is wrong, right? I assume you do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty obvious one.
So we hear about that.
Yeah, and we probably shouldn't like shame women over having like big labia or different types of vaginas, right? I think everybody agrees with this. This is like stuff we shouldn't do today. And I'm on this podcast, and this girl just flat out, to the agreement of like every other person on the podcast, and like the audience is just like, yeah, I don't really like uncut dicks because I just think they're filthy. And I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, hold on. If I were to ever make an equivalent comment about your vagina, like, I don't like girls with big lips because I think they look like fucking Dumbo, right? I would get destroyed. I would get absolutely, rightfully so, I would get ass blasted for that comment. But like, she made that comment, and then other guys on the podcast too were defending her. I'm like, dude, you're like literally defending, like, I don't know, that type of shit is just super fucked up to me. The double standards there drive me crazy.
And I get so tired of like bringing it up, because every time you try to bring it up, even like in a very fair and modest way, which seems very equal, they look at you like, oh, you're an incel. That's like the first like way they denigrate anything that you have to say in regards. And it makes, what ends up happening is that men take their issues and they drive further underground to these guys who do these red pill talks and do this stuff. And I'm not even mad at them. You know, to some degree, I'm not even that mad.
Because you understand it, like, fuck. Like, if no one else on the other side is going to hear you out, then obviously, yeah, I mean, you have no alternative, right? Yeah.
I was having this conversation with somebody, but, you know, like, I was talking to this girl, and she said, yeah, I watch The Real often because I feel like a lot of my issues are reflected. I'm like, name me one single show similar to The View that identifies with men's issues.
You have them. You know what it is? It's fucking Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and shit, right? That's where they end up going.
They're on YouTube.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Nothing on mainstream television.
Yeah.
Dudes watch sports because that is the closest thing to themselves that they see on television on a regular basis that is, like, not fiction related. You know? And so you ask, like, why are they seeking these guidance from these men? It's like, well, who are they going to get it from?
Exactly.
If I didn't get it from my dad, you know, man. You know, if I didn't get it from my dad, if I didn't get it from any kind of male role models around me or some kind of community sense, I'm going to look online. And if I can't find it, like, in a television set, like, I'm going to go on YouTube and start search some shit up. Who else is going to talk about it?
And you can't blame people for doing it, right? Like, people get so mad that, like, I don't know why so many people listen to Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and some Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro on, like, these men's issues. Like, okay, well, what the fuck are you telling them, right? That all men are rapists, that all men are violent, that men are disgusting and evil and horrible, and that white men are horrible people and they don't deserve any blah, blah, blah. Like, damn, like, I understand that, like, I am a big believer in privilege and I think all that exists. But, dude, if you shit on a group of people over and over and over again hard enough, of course they're not going to listen to anything you have to fucking say. And of course they're going to go somewhere else for their messaging. What the fuck do you expect to happen? Like, this shouldn't be a surprise to you.
Well, even beyond that, it's also just a matter of, like, you see yourself as an individual. You're not even thinking of things on a macro scale. So when I'm dealing with, like, this terrible situation, like this girl keeps hitting me at home or in public, and I don't know how to deal with it, I'm not thinking about, like, well, the male species is definitely privileged over the woman. Like, as an individual, I just want someone to speak to my personal experience, right? So, you know, when people are like, well, women suffer, I'm like, nobody's disagreeing with that, but you can't deny the fact that men have their own set of issues, and men are very concerned with the things that they're dealing with first and foremost. It's not until you're able to address the problems that you have that you're then afterwards able to look at larger scale problems.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people don't realize that what you said there is a trillion percent true, and a lot of people don't realize that. We analyze people as classes, as we should. It's the only way we can. But individuals don't interpret things as a class, right? If you tell a white person, like, there is no such thing as black on white racism, from a class point of view, that's kind of true. Like, black people as a class of people in the United States don't really have the same power that white people do. But if you're just an individual white guy and, you know, you log into Twitter and everybody's saying, like, here comes the Mayo side, you know, fuck whiteys, kill white people, fuck blah, 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 no whites allowed. It's like, well, that individual is not going to feel their class privilege as a white person. They're just going to feel like they're being fucking racist against. Like, that's the individual interpretation. And a lot of people seem to miss that. They think that, like, individuals will interpret things as entire classes, and that's just ridiculous. It's just not how any of that works.
No, it's not the way people's minds work, and there's nothing more belittling than when you say, I went through a hate crime. It's always like, no, it's just prejudice. I was like, yeah, what does that contribute to this person's, like, terrible experience right there? Like, I don't understand what that kind of dialogue has. But, you know, just to bring it back to the stuff before, it also irks me tremendously whenever feminists are so dishonest. They're like, well, we have feminist spaces to discuss these issues. Bitch, where? Name me one. Because honestly, we've never heard of them. So whenever, like, people are like, we want to create our own spaces, even if you don't agree with it, and I don't agree with a lot of it, when you come into this discussion like, well, we've created one, it's like, no, you haven't. And it's okay that you haven't, but don't tell people they can't seek out refuge in something that identifies with them when you are not willing to create something like that for them.
Yeah, or when it feels like, you know, those spaces might exist, but in order to gain access to them, you basically come in and be like, I am a male, I am a rapist, I am a horrible person, I understand, I'm here, please reform me. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I don't know.
Bro. Yeah, that stuff happens. Like I said, I didn't expect to get so triggered by it, but we just happened to go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah,
so.
It's annoying because, like, the thing that annoys me most is that it hurts my side because, like, I genuinely believe that there are way better ways. I think MTGOW and Red Pill and these guys are fucking insane. They're crazy. But, like, people follow them because some of their descriptions of what's happening are true. And if you're going to be on the left and you're going to deny the reality of everything they say, well, fuck you. I mean, no one's going to listen to you. Like, be smarter.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I concede ground, like you said, on certain topics because they are right about certain things. But I do think, and when we say red pill and MTGOW, we also have to recognize like there's tiers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Some people graduate into like the depths of hell, and other folks are like just right below the surface, and like some of it's fairly reasonable. But
for
again,
like, there's a lot of like even in like the PUA community, like on one end you have like, listen guys, we're going to work on our self-esteem so that we can approach women better and blah, 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 which is like fine. But then on the other hand, you've got, listen up, okay? Women are sluts. We're the slut makers. Our goal is to trick these stupid bitches into fucking us by any means possible. And I'm going to show you how to do it. All right. Like, like show up at my fucking house. And when I have the woman back, I've got books stacked on all the chairs. So we have to sleep in our fucking bed. Like dumb shit like that. Like you got it at both extremes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it always comes down to the same thing for me. It's like there was a vacuum and somebody filled it. Yeah. And now you're mad with how they filled it. Bitch, if you're not going to fill it yourself, or you're not going to encourage somebody more positive to fill it, then I don't want to hear from you, Because when I was told I had to approach women and that's what the way the game was, I was like, well, how do I do that? Where do I learn? Well, guess where I went? I started watching Keys to the VIP. I started watching all these fucking, pickup artistry stuff. I read the game and things like that because I'm like, I need to learn. I don't know what I'm doing. Yep. And there's nobody to teach me, right? Am I some incel red pill terrible person? I'm like, no, I was looking for a solution to a problem that was presented before me. You guys don't want to approach us. You don't want to make that first move. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Fine. If that's how you work, I can't change your mind. No. But I'm going to try to find a solution to improve my odds so that I'm not fucked up. Now, of course, when there's a void like that and someone fills it and they're terrible, well, the blind will lead the blind. But at the end of the day, that void remains. So until something better comes along, I can't stand when people complain about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like the pickup artistry stuff, like, are you surprised? Yeah. Do you think young men at 18 know what the fuck they're doing when they're going up to women and they're having like their self-esteem crushed? Like today, obviously everyone's got online dating, so it's a different ball game. But I'm 30, so I remember being 18. Like we didn't have that. You had to go to a club or you had to go up to women and listen. That shit's frightening. It is. So I just think there's sometimes a lot of pressure on men. Yes, men have way more responsibilities that they also have to assume and that they don't do a good job of. But like, some of the stuff that we're just expected to do, I'm like, great, I'm glad you expect us to do this. How are you going to give us the resources to do it well? Especially
when like the messaging in society, even for women, is so fucking confusing. Like one example that is really, have you ever watched the movie The Notebook?
Yes, briefly, parts of it.
Oh, fuck. Dude, that guy is desperate as fuck, okay? Crazy. And if this guy was any, like, just normal creepy dude that you weren't into, oh my God, this guy would get roasted. But there's a lot of, even among women in society, they'll kind of reinforce these stereotypes of, like, the very romantic guy that goes through whatever he needs to get the woman in the end. And it's like, okay, well, as long as you're into the dude, that's cool. But damn, there's going to be a lot of guys watching a movie like this that are going to take that message and then try to make that same approach, and you're going to think they're creepy fucking rapists, Like, jeez.
But also, I don't know if this is that perpetual cycle thing, but now, like, especially on a cultural level, one thing we love to endorse is just like, yo, get your money, whatever means necessary. You know what I mean? Throw that ass back, pop that pussy, you know what I mean? Fleece men. And like, listen, if people gonna do that, they live their best lives. But then it breeds this like chasm where men grow more resentful because they're like, y'all gold diggers. And then women are like, you know what? If you're going to call us bitches, then we just going to get our money and do whatever we have to do. So I feel like there's this thing that's constantly repeating itself where as the sexes grow more angry at each other, it feels like there's more of a divide. But I don't know if that's just more of a perception thing or a reality. You can't get stats on these kind of things.
Yeah, it's hard.
It does feel like what I'm seeing online. And I don't know if I should take that at face value, but that's just the things I've seen as well. But I'm gonna just move away from this and go to something else real quick. Yes, something you guys really touched on that I thought was super important. You talked about how you had an experience when you were younger that you didn't recognize that was like terrible, and you felt like we have to expand the lexicon when it comes to things like sexual assault and things like that, because we use these like huge loaded terms to describe a variety of acts that maybe sometimes more innocuous versus things that are much more severe. Yeah. And I wanted you to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that like we essentialize a lot of criticisms about ourselves, meaning that like if we hear a criticism, that's not just a criticism of ourselves, we become that thing. So it's really hard for people to internalize that they have like a bad thing about themselves without feeling like they're wholly bad. And this leads to a whole bunch of negative things. So like a really good example of this is for larger people. It's not enough to say that like, listen, you know, I'm overweight. It's probably not healthy. Like, but, you know, I don't hate myself. You know, I'm overweight and I need to do something about it, right? Nobody can have that opinion. Instead, it's like, listen, I'm fat and I'm fucking beautiful and fuck skinny bitches, all right? I'm not going to admit a single fault with myself because if I do it, it means I'm demeaning myself and I can't handle that mentally. So I think that I'm beautiful and fuck everything else, right? Like we have this really unhealthy aspect of being able to take any like part of a fault with ourselves. When you combine that with the idea that we have like one word to describe behavior that can range from innocuous to fucking horrible, I think that it makes it really hard for people to accept that they've ever done anything bad, because why the fuck would they, right? If you are, you know, if you're getting flirty with a girl in gym class in high school and, you know, like you slap her ass, you know, this is dumb. You shouldn't do that, right? And in high school, you're a fucking idiot. And, you know, at some point you need to learn better, right? But that is quote unquote sexual assault, the same way that like running up behind a woman in a bar when you're 30 and just grabbing her boobs from behind and be like, oh, fucking boobie, right? That's sexual assault too, right? But these two things are way different than each other. And when you call both of them sexual assault, you're putting people in the lower end of this category in a very weird world where they don't want to identify with the upper category, right? I don't want to be thought of as like the guy in the bar that just runs up and grabs a woman's boobs. Like, that's fucking crazy. So like, I think that what that leads people to do is just say like, well, hold on, I'm actually going to defend all of my behavior, because if I acknowledge any fault, I'm literally a fucking rapist. It's like how people, I think that's how people's brains like function there.
Yeah. You know, I think what you described kind of explained a lot of stuff for me, because I would have experiences that happen and I would explain to someone and they're like, you were sexually assaulted. I'm like, but I don't feel like I was. But like, no, that's what it was. And I'm like, look, I don't think it's a good thing. Like, you know, I was groped, but no, you were sexually. I'm like, oh, that's such a loaded term. Like, I don't know, maybe if I would use that word. I have a hard time finding the right words for certain situations. And I think I agree with you that it makes it hard for us to accept culpability, because like, but I think in general, people refuse culpability about stuff that they did, because everyone wants to view themselves in the most positive light possible. So whenever anything happens, they're like, I'm not that, because I couldn't believe that I would do that. But, you know.
I agree, but I mean, like at some point, like people apologize to each other, right? Like people are willing to accept some faults, but like, man, dude, when you're loading them that hard, I wouldn't expect a normal person to be able to do it. I don't expect a normal person to ever come and be like, yeah, dude, I definitely sexually assaulted girls in high school. And, you know, to be totally blunt and totally honest, if you're a guy and you've dated women, you've definitely done some stupid fucked up shit in your life. 100%. I know I've done stupid fucked up shit in my life, whether it was dating in high school or stuff in my like very early 20s. Like 100%, we all do. But like when all of that gets labeled as like sexual assault and rapist behavior, it's like, fuck, like, well, hold on, I don't know if I want to admit to, I don't even know if I want to feel like I did anything bad. Like you'll start making excuses for it and justifying it, because like, fuck, nobody wants to be identified that way. Like we don't feel that way about ourselves. And it feels like there must be some difference. It feels like there must be some difference between what you did and what like a guy that knowingly goes out and gropes women does. There must be some difference, but we use the same word for all of it, and it fucks our understanding of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to ask you something on this topic of like doing these things. I don't know if this was the case for you, but me growing up, the topic of consent and things like that didn't come up till like I was 23 and 24. Don't get me wrong, everyone knew, you don't pin a girl down, you rape her. Like everyone knew that. But like the minutia, like the more nuanced aspects of it, like even the idea of coercion, like that stuff started coming up later. Did you have that same experience, or
yeah, definitely. I'm 32. Do you ever say your age publicly, or?
Yeah, I'm 30.
Okay, yeah, I would say that these types of takes didn't come out. These weren't popular, at least, until way later. Because when I was growing up, I think it was basically just like, as long as you have a yes, you're okay to go. And so like your goal as a guy is like, what do I need to do? You're kind of like a car salesman, right? What do I need to do to get this motherfucker to say yes to fucking me? Okay. Step one, alcohol. You know. Step two, put them in a situation where they can't say no. If they're sleeping over with me, this motherfucker's not going to turn me down, right? Because of the implication. Not necessarily, not that extreme, but like, right? Like the idea basically becomes you're in this like negotiation where you're doing anything you can to try to get the other person to fuck you. You know, whether that's alcohol or drugs or, you know, compromised positions. And that's kind of like, it feels like that's how consent in some ways was almost kind of approached when I was in high school. Like, as long as they say yes, you're okay.
Yeah, I mean, people didn't even know what it looked like when somebody would be coerced. People didn't look like, especially when I was 18, I'm like, I didn't know what hesitation looked like on a woman. I didn't know like what doubt and all that stuff. Like, it was pumped full of hormones and be like, oh, she said yes. I was like super excited. Like, I would not have known what those things were. And I remember when I started hearing about this stuff, I was so confused because I'd been doing sex one way for a long time, and then everyone's like, no, that's wrong. So I'm like, all right, I got a lot of learning to do because I didn't know people were going through these struggles. Like all this stuff that have been changing over the last 5 years, which I think is wonderful. I also have to recognize like we haven't had the time to do the education, bro. I can honestly tell you like sex ed is one of the most poor things done in our society today. You know, I feel like people are way more comfortable having sex than they are talking about it. You know, even talking about like, I could be having sex with a girl, and I'll be like, hey, how do you feel right now? She'll be like, fine. And I could tell she's withering in pain. I'm like, why can't you just communicate that? And it's just this big deal in her head. Like, and I understand it comes from a lot of stuff. And okay, but if I wasn't sensitive enough to know that, some people could view me as in that situation not being considerate enough.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to be a fucking mind. I'm sorry. Okay, I love you, women. But yeah, sometimes it literally feels like where it's like, and that actually, I actually just don't talk to people when they start doing shit like when I feel like you're not being honest with me about how you feel. Like, motherfucker, I can tell you're uncomfortable. Fucking say something. What the fuck is wrong with you, right? Like, yeah, that shit drives me crazy. Yeah, but to be fair, you gave the other side of that really well. It's because there's a lot of things that are going on in their head too. They don't know what happens if they express some frustration. They don't know how that's going to play out if they say they're not comfortable or whatever. So they just hold it in. So yeah, you did a good job of giving the other side of that. Sorry, I came back pretty hard on the other side. But I do agree with that. Yeah.
Here's my issue, and this is my one word. And I've had this conversation a few times. I think when it comes to the conversation of consent and communication, I think a lot of the burden is placed on men to go the extra mile and to be extremely careful, which I agree we should all be considered the people we're sleeping with. But I do not think it's feasible, nor do I think it's sensible to expect that burden to be placed on men, considering if they're not apt to pick up on the small signs, if they're not capable of understanding, you could like, there are experiences where women can feel violated and no violation took place, meaning you weren't able to voice your agency, and as a result, like a lot of I remember this one instance, man. This happened in my city, and I just asked a question. The whole city blew up. But these two comics were dating. Both of them were fat, okay? And they didn't have sex for I think like 5 months. And at one point, while they were in bed, the guy, confused by like why they weren't sleeping together, but he didn't want to broach. He's like, "Hey, are you just like unattracted to me?" And the girl said, "No." And he said, well, it was like, okay, like, then why don't you want to have sex? Is it because I'm like too fat? Like, you can just tell me. She's like, no, it's not that. And then she progressively ended up having sex with him. Now, none of us were in the room. So none of us can say for certain that he didn't like say a bunch of stuff like, hey, if you love me, then fuck. Like, nobody can say that for sure. But she wrote out her testimony. She didn't include any of that. Okay, she didn't include none of that. She just, that's how she wrote it. So that's how I'm saying it. And then everyone came down the guy. Oh, you sexually assaulted her. You're a rapist, all this stuff. And in my head, I'm like, was he manipulating her, or was he just voicing a valid insecurity that he had in that moment that made her uncomfortable? And he wasn't able to recognize that she was doing this out of pity. Right? Like, how do we know the difference between the two?
Yeah.
It's so long.
And it's so frustrating because like we're in a roundabout way, you end up doing the thing that you complained about conservatives doing. So earlier I complained about kind of like infantilizing women, like treating them like kids, you got to protect them, blah, 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 blah. But then on the other end, you get called a victim blamer if you say like, hey, like, I think maybe it is on women to communicate a little bit better, right? Like if I have to deal with a woman, you know, like she's a 7-year-old child that is too stupid to ever voice a concern, that's too stupid to ever express discomfort, that's too stupid or incapable. Like at some point, like I understand that we need to be sensitive to those situations, but damn, like men aren't perfect either. Like you're expecting us to read body language, to read verbal cues, to figure out all of this, while at the same time we're juggling like our own kind of wants and desires, and we're trying to figure out like that's a pretty high burden to place on a guy, like in the middle of figuring out a sexual situation where so much like ego and emotional stake and everything is on the line for both parties as well, you know?
Yeah. I think that's the tough part. And I don't say this because I'm like, women, pick up your... I say this because I think it's the best solution to you being protecting yourself. The more you're able to communicate and state it clearly, the best odds you're going to have of coming to that situation as safely as possible.
Yeah.
Because if, you know, and that's like one of the biggest things with flirting. Sometimes people are like, man, I want consent to be overt. I want it to be clear. But I'm like, unfortunately, flirting and sexual tension is like a lot of innuendo.
Yeah.
Things are very rarely explicitly said because people don't like it. or when they get it explicitly, they're so not used to it that it makes them uncomfortable. So people would rather be in innuendo and like, I think he wants it, but I'm unsure, because it raises attention. Like if you are uncertain how someone feels, but you're kind of and then you just go in for the kiss and you get it, there's a certain level of excitement there.
Yeah, of course.
Certain. But on the flip side, if you go in for that kiss and the person didn't want it, well then you're a piece of shit. Well, the difference between the two can be so small in terms of detail, and so long as we accept that dating has to be a lot of innuendo and has to be a lot of like this unsaid stuff, I feel like there's going to be so much miscommunication. I'm not talking about the stuff that's on the extremes, the stuff where it's like, I don't care what you want, I'm still going to kiss her, I'm gonna fuck her.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that, but a lot of stuff happens towards the middle as well, where things are just not clear, and I question how we fix that.
Yeah, for sure. And you wind up in these weird situations where, like, I don't know. It's really hard to have a bad experience with a girl and it not be like fucking rape or something, you know? Where it's like sometimes people fuck up, and you know, sometimes like like people make mistakes. They were pushing too hard or whatever. Like this happens, but it feels like that isn't enough. It has to be like more like, well, that guy attempted rape, sexual assault, attempted rape. It's like, damn, maybe it was just like a really poorly negotiated interaction, and you know, like the guy made a mistake and fucked up. But like, geez, like it reminds me of the I'm sure you must have covered this, the Aziz story or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And
That was
like
so cringy.
Any reasonable person reads this and was like, yeah, this was just, man, he fucked up, dude. Like this is just a really poorly negotiated sexual interaction. But like, this wasn't rapey, you know. This wasn't like he wasn't violating any. Like, come on, like don't do this. Like, and we're at a point right now where in my little political communities, like I am unironically at the point, and I hate that I have to say this because I feel like I'm admitting that I was wrong to the crazy anti-SJW skeptics in the fucking 2016 era. We're at the point now where some people are legitimately being called rapists for flirting, for awkward flirty encounters. And I'm like, wait a second. Like, I'll read like DMs and the guy is like, oh, like, you know, what are your porn preferences? And like the girl is like kind of flirting back. And then like 3 months later, the girl will come out and leak DMs. You're like, you know what? I don't think this encounter was appropriate. It's like, and you read through all the DMs, like the guy's just flirting with you. Like, damn, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? And this guy's like unironically like getting canceled and shit on shows and panels now because you didn't like that you mutually flirted a long time ago. Like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, this is
hate that.
Insane to me.
I hate reading people's DMs. I feel like I hate reading because I feel like I'm missing so much context. First off, traditionally when people release DMs, they release portions of it. They rarely release all the logs. And then secondly, you don't have the full context of their interactions in person. What were they like? What are some of these inside jokes that we can't understand? Because like if I read any person's like flirting interactions, generally it's going to seem very awkward or kind of fucking weird to me because I don't understand how they communicate on a regular basis. The same way, like if I'm with my homies and we're ragging and we're being super foul to each other, people walking in be like, you guys are hyper aggressive. I'm like, no, this is our normal. So I always feel weird when I have to read people's DMs because I'm like, if you read my DMs or if you read a bunch of other people's DMs, it would look fucking strange for as well.
Yeah, I don't like how a lot of people will say these things where they're like, a lot of people will say this shit. We're like, oh, like this is ultra cringe. Like, what you're like, dude, I consider myself to be like decent at like, you know, getting girls and talking to people, whatever. If you were to read any of my flirty DMs, they would come off as incredibly fucking cringe. Like, what do you think flirting looks like? It's not like this smooth guy dropping these fucking Hollywood lines or some shit. Like, what is your expectation here? Like, yeah, this guy's trying to fuck this girl and they're flirting with her. Of course these are fucking cringy. Like, that's always going to be the case. Like, nobody has ever had like these types of DMs leaked between them and a significant other where some girl they're trying to fuck and it's like, wow, like this is like the ultimate fucking smooth killer. Like, oh, like, come on, dude. Like, it's such a stupid standard that people play. So,
I'm not mad at the fact that people have that kind of uncomfortableness with it. I'm fine with that. My issue is when they equate their discomfort with something terrible happening.
Yeah.
They think that because they feel uncomfortable reading something, therefore something nefarious happens. And then with their bias, they read into it with intentions that you can't read into that message. But because you feel some type of, you're like, it must be real. I'm like, what are you, some kind of like psychic? Like, I don't understand how you're getting to that conclusion. If you're being very sensible, you recognize that there's nothing there, but you know, people think that their feelings are more important than anything else. So I'm just like, I don't know. Yeah. I struggle with, especially when people are like, cover this, look at these leaked DMs. I'm like, bro, I'm not reading that shit. That's gonna, no, that's I'm not reading how a dude awkward, like how a 19-year-old flirted with a 17-year-old, like that fucking call me.
Oh, dude, I lost my mind. I was like,
no, fuck you.
Are you serious? So many people are passing around the picture of the guy from Law and Order SVU where he's like slamming the desk and he's like, "You sick fuck! She was 17 years old in 364 days. What's wrong with you?" Like, I couldn't believe it. Call me Car's a 19-year-old guy sexy with a 70-year-old. Like, what? Yeah, no shit. Wait, have you ever had like a senior and a junior dating in high school? Like, what is even happening right now? This is insane to me. Oh my! And his friends, dude, his friends sold him out to Keemstar so fucking quick. Oh my god, I couldn't believe that shit. That was unreal to me.
It made me cringe so unbelievable. I'm like, do you motherfuckers don't remember being 17 or 19? Like, do you think you were smooth or half decent? I just didn't understand that whole dynamic. And I'm like, what do you think happens when you turn 19? Do you think you figure shit out all of a sudden? Bro, all my conversations at 19 were hella cringe if I went back to read them. And they're like, well, he's got all this power. Who teaches people?
Yeah, what do you mean? He might have all the power, but he's fucking 19. And like, we know, the thing is that we know this because when we talk about like child actors and shit, right? Even if they are fucking 16, 17, we say the same thing like, oh man, dude, it's so sad that they get taken advantage of, that they get abused, that they get like all this shit. Nobody would ever fucking look at like the relationship. Did you hear about the shit with like Kesha and her manager or whatever?
Yeah.
Nobody looks at it and is like, oh, well, she was an adult, fuck her. Right? Like, nobody is ever looking that way. So, like, why do we all of a sudden pretend, like, you know, does Carson have, like, some power dynamic over some of his fans? Yeah, sure, possibly. Hey, you want a real fucking hot take? Women that are offering sex also innately have some power over men that are ultra fucking hungry for sex. Like, these types of power dynamics exist everywhere. Just because a power dynamic exists doesn't necessarily mean it's being exploited. And to expect a 19-year-old to have a full understanding of how to navigate, like, sexual relationships when he has a power differential, this is a fantasy. There's no fucking way that any fucking 19-year-old understands this. I don't believe it.
No. And again, this comes down to the thing where I'm like, we're so quick to be like, you're trash. And like, nobody thinks of like, where's the education for young men to learn how to communicate or to learn how to flirt effectively? Like, where are these initiatives? Like, nobody seems to ask that question. People just think men are born with game. People just think men are born with confidence and know how to appropriately talk to everybody, and it makes me cringe so much on the inside.
Or like the education.
You don't understand us.
Yeah, the education is like, this is the bare minimum you need to do to not get charged with rape, and then good luck figuring the rest out on your own. And it's like, okay, well, good luck, I guess.
Bro, but yeah, you know, all of these topics trigger the fuck out of me because I'm just like, I don't understand how you guys think this way. Another issue I found, I think, especially with educating young people, and like somebody else in your stream said this, it wasn't you, but they said we need to educate young people through school, and we need to have parents teaching sex ed. Do you remember? I think it was Dr. K, the white dude, who said that.
Yeah, to be clear, that's a trans woman, so I think they go by she, her, but yeah.
Okay, my bad.
No, you're fine, yeah. But yeah, I think she mentioned that, yeah. Okay.
That's also another thing I had issue with. Not because I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but I think it's a very, I'm going to say this, I think it's a very like non-religious and very like white mindset to have, just because I know as an immigrant and like from every immigrant person I've ever met, like there's no conversations about sex ever.
Yeah.
There's no conversation.
I talk about this on my stream all the time because half my family is Cuban, and growing up, my grandma lived in a very black like apartment complex. So all of my friends growing up were black, and it's so funny listening to white people on the internet talk about like, you know, how like, I don't think they realize sometimes how socially conservative a lot of different types of minority families were.
Super.
Yeah, because my experience growing up with my friend, because I would spend the night sometimes, and man, that was a fucking conservative family. That was like you're getting your ass kicked. It's not enough to be out of bed for church every Saturday. Like, you had to be out of bed, dressed up, ready to go, or you were like in huge trouble. And like, yeah, a lot of that family was like very, very socially conservative. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Oh no, people have no idea how like socially conservative a lot of minority communities are, and they don't even want to look at it because it means that like, especially people on the left would have to acknowledge a lot of stuff that they fight for. Those minorities that they love to fight for don't believe in whatsoever.
Yeah.
But especially on the topic of sex ed, is like those conversations don't happen because you're such in a non-secular environment, and like sex is so shamed and frowned upon. It's meant to be like, do it when you're married. There is zero education. I did not even know what an orgasm was until like I was 17. And that was just because I was so removed from everything.
Yeah. And if you think that's bad as men, women that live in these environments, it blows my fucking mind. But there are a lot of women that have their first fucking period and their parents never told them anything about it. So you'll have these girls in fucking school that will just explode and gush fucking blood, and they have no fucking idea like what is happening. And they're like, and like the parents will even joke about like, oh, haha, like, yeah, we all dealt with that. I was like, dude, what the that's actually insane to me. What the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah.
That's a common thing. It's so common. So the idea that we can just start educating, like, it might work for some folks, and I do think it's something that we should strive for, but I just don't believe it's feasible, especially for folks who come from these families. So I think it's just a couple things like coupled together. It's like this whole conversation of consent and all this stuff. I think it's great that we're having them, but I think we also have to accept that it's going to take a lot of time for us to ingrain this in our values, to be more considerate, to undo a lot of the bad habits that we built. It's like, you know, when you're 25 and someone starts talking about, you need to do this and consent in the bedroom. I'm like, well, bitch, I've been having sex this way forever and no one's really complained. So why am I going to change it? But then everyone's like, no, if you don't, you're this. So there needs to be a long period for us to fix it. And unfortunately, when I say this, people are like, well, women are being raped today. I'm like, I don't disagree. And I'm not saying it's okay. What I'm saying is, like, for education to be ingrained like this, you can't fix these issues overnight, whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, whether it's, you know, rape culture, whatever you want to bring up. To think that just because you've ran workshops, you're going to fix people, you're crazy. I know women who run consent workshops who will say, this is what I want loud and verbal consent, and then get in the bedroom themselves and can't undo the fact that they still like things done a certain way. You know, and is that their fault? Didn't they take the class? No, it's not their fault. They've felt some type of way and ingrained in a social environment that's made them comfortable with something for so long. You can't expect an education or a Twitter thread or anything like that to just undo all of that. You don't just hear like, well, coercion is bad, don't do it anymore, and think you could undo decades of habits. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it takes time for sure. And it has to come from a lot of different areas, you know? Like, we can advocate for parents to be more open. I think that's a good idea, even if it's really hard on something. I think it's good to advocate for it. But like, it also needs to be like culturally reinforced. It needs to be socially reinforced. Like, it has to come from a lot of different areas for people to really feel it, you know?
Yeah, but I think the problem, meanwhile, is we can't have this conversation and stigmatize literally anyone who has a questionable sexual experience.
Yeah.
If you do that and you like cancel, we don't open up the conversation for people who have also done certain things and may not even realize it to come forward, and we also don't allow people to learn in a open environment. Like we say, you know, like, and also there's the, you know, I hate to bring this up because it's always like, man, double standards, but the idea that women can do these certain things and get away with it and still be not seen as any type of way, but then for men, like, they're immediately shunned for exact same behavior is just crazy to me. Like, it makes it so that these men become more ostracized and become more combative with the very topics that you're trying to raise. So,
yeah, and people see it happen. They're not stupid. And then now they feel like something is fucked up, or they're not getting like, some double standard shit, and people see it, and like, you can't just pretend it doesn't exist, you know?
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I struggle with. You know, the Call Me Carson stuff is a perfect example. We put these like ridiculous expectations. We blast it online. We're like, he's a piece of shit. Yeah. And every other 19-year-old watches like, man, I just had a conversation like that yesterday. I'm a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck. What am I supposed to do? Right. And Aziz Ansari is another perfect example. That shit confused me so fucking hard that I'm like, have I been doing terrible shit this whole time that I don't even realize it? And then I talked to my girlfriend or like the people I've dated, and they're like, no, it was fine. And I'm like, I don't understand shit.
Yeah.
When this stuff first started popping off, this is like 2016, and I'm heavily into the arts community. This was super prevalent in that community specifically. There was no room for discussion. There was literally no room for like, I don't understand something. It was, these are the new rules, and that's how we're going to move forward.
And if you disagree, you are literally a fucking rapist.
Yes.
That's it.
Or you're, or worse, sometimes even worse, you're a rape apologist.
Rape apologist or rape enabler, yep, yeah.
I was just like, God damn, this is so bad. You attended this man's lecture? I'm like, oh my, I can't have these guys. And sometimes people exaggerate it, right? And they'll be like, man, this is cancel culture is the worst thing, blah, blah, blah. And I agree that a lot of people do exaggerate it, but I know, especially for my field and where I was working, people literally lost their entire livelihoods on a micro scale. Like, they couldn't work within a scene, and they had to move cities for things that were rather innocuous if you would look at them today. So
And it sucks because you have to fight so hard on both sides. Because that's why I was so strongly on the other side. Because like I'll come out and say some shit where it's like, listen, like I think cancel culture and the way we police language, it's getting a little bit ridiculous. And I'll get a whole bunch of people agreeing with me, but those people just want to like, you know, call each other the N-word and the F-word online all the time. And it's like, okay, fuck, hold on, wait, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, hold on, wait. These aren't the people that I'm trying to empower here. Like, because both people on both sides are playing like so fucking hard to their individual like feelings that, and it's so hard to find like any type of reasonable middle ground. Because I would fight back against claims of cancel culture so often because people are like, cancel culture is fucking out of control. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It's like, I don't know if Bill Cosby deserved to be canceled. Like, okay, wait, hold on, dude, right? yeah, and it's like, fuck, like we're like, there has to be a better middle ground here. Like, Jesus Christ, you know? Because on one end, you've got people like, you know, I don't think Weinstein did anything wrong. Those girls could have said no if they wanted to. It's like, okay, wait, hold on. And then on the other hand, they're like, well, Aziz is basically a fucking rapist. It's like, wait, yeah. And it's so hard to situate yourself on either side without there being fucking lunatics that are like hijacking these conversations and like driving you crazy.
I think two things are happening there. One, if you're going to concede ground to a perceived group that you feel would not concede ground to you, then you just feel like you're surrendering completely without being heard. And nobody wants to be subservient to some other group. Be like, all right, well, you guys are always right. Like, nobody's trying to do that, right? But then the second thing is also, as we live online, we see individuals or groups of individuals saying certain things, and then we kind of start to represent that as a much larger subset of people, because I feel like our brains are not capable of understanding. Like, oh, this is maybe just like 10% of people on this section, or this is maybe like 20%.
Absolutely, our brains are not
capable to do that, and so it makes these conversations so difficult because we begin to jump into these generalizations because we have no way of coping with. It's still a lot of people, but it doesn't still represent the majority or any significant portion that like should make you worry necessarily. So it's just tough to tackle these things and not feel like you're being ostracized because it's still a lot of people yelling at you.
Yep, 100%. And I still feel, I'm pretty confident of this, that right now the problem in society is there's way more women that are like being put into shitty sexual circumstances than there are guys being canceled over it. Like, that's a pretty online problem. It's not as prevalent as people probably complain about it. Even me, as I probably complain about it. But man, when it happens, you see it, and it's hard sometimes to remember that, you know, there's a world outside of the internet and that we can kind of get lost in our own little communities, and we forget that there's like a broader world out there that has no fucking idea, you know, what even happens online.
I actually had that experience. I think when I deleted most of my socials, whether it be like my personal Instagram, my personal Facebook, my personal Twitter, like my experience when I just got back to talking, because a lot of people don't think about this stuff that deeply or not nearly as plugged in as you and I might be. And it kind of was a little bit refreshing because I wasn't constantly bombarded with like the next drama update or the next like scandal and everyone's opinions all the time and everyone being so polarized. So it made me realize like, oh, a lot of people are just like not in this at all, and they don't think, you know, it's like the QAnon thing. You know, it seems like such a big thing online, but if you ask most individuals in real life, they've never heard of it. And so there's that interesting reality where it's like, as long as I stay in this sphere, I'm always going to feel that.
Yeah, and then it's hard to tell when it's becoming a bigger phenomenon. The QAnon thing is a really good example because I would have assumed that like QAnon is like some crazy shit, nobody believes in it. But then when we get somebody in Congress that's a QAnoner, and it's like, fuck, okay, well now I'm having a really hard time disentangling like how online is this versus how offline is this, you know? And there's a lot of talk and research about like, you know, like people that do politics full time, like people that run campaigns or people that talk about it online, these are not normal average people, right? These are very different than the normal population. And it can be hard to track like the different opinions of everybody just because, you know, it's so hard to figure out who believes in what in the real world and how popular something online is becoming, you know, offline, and like, yeah, fuck, it's so hard to track all of that.
So yeah, I think I would want to ask just a couple last questions. I want to ask like, so we talked about what some of the issues are in regards to like men viewing like the feeling that they have ownership over sometimes women's bodies, or women not being interested in approaching folks. Outside of those, do you feel like there's any things that you feel like as a society we need to do more of in regards to like solving some of these solutions, even if it's on a small scale as individuals?
I think that having like more cool conversations about like consent is probably good, where it's not like as judgmental as they always seem to be. I think that type of thing can be helpful. I don't know which, I'm guessing you haven't seen a conversation that I had on a panel relating to these topics that was kind of recent. It was probably just the Filthy Robot convo you saw.
Yeah, I just saw the one with like 10 people on it.
Yeah. So there was this guy on this platform, and people were telling him like, "Hey, your behavior is kind of problematic. It can blah blah blah." Well, not like that. They were being way more aggressive, and I felt like I kind of had to step in and be like, "Okay, wait, you guys need to chill," because like, I don't know if you guys realize this, but you're basically screaming at this dude that feels like he's never really done anything that wrong in his life. He's like a fucking rapist, right? Like, this guy is never going to see your point of view. He's never going to come over to your side if he feels like he's in a room full of people that are just screaming rapist, rapist, rapist at him. So I think like one way that we can help as individuals is like moderating these conversations to be more healthy and less fucking judgmental. I think would be a really good place to start, right? The goal isn't to make anybody feel bad about what they've done. The goal is to change their future behavior.
I think I fail at that a lot of the times because I think sometimes I get triggered by certain things and I lose it, and I'm like recognizing that I myself am engaging in like the very behavior that I think is destructive. So I would tend to agree with that. It's just hard not to give into those inclinations, but I think that is
for sure. I do it a lot too. Yeah, I'm not perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so you feel like facilitating those kind of conversations and just doing so in a non-judgmental manner. Yeah. It's
Another
hard.
thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's kind of hard to have those conversations with other people because folks are very rarely willing to speak like that in the light. Because even if me and my community would be like, we won't judge you too negatively, once on the internet, it's for everyone to see. You know, and however accepting we may be, once a couple folks on Twitter pick up on it, you just feel like, oh fuck, I'm ruined. You know, so it's hard to have these kind of conversations online.
Yeah.
You can't have any especially around the topic of consent. I think we've gotten better today. And especially like towards the last little while, but it was very hard to have any kind of conversations or to just. I remember one time I said, guys, are we? I'm not saying she wasn't violent. I'm not saying she didn't go through something terrible. But like, are we sure this person's this? And I received letters that people are like, I want you to sign your name at the bottom. It's like, and I'm like, whoa, we can't do this. Like, you want me to sign a letter and delete my account? Like, what are you talking about? But it felt. I remember being on the receiving end of that. And I'm like, and I'm pretty resilient, so I think I can handle most things. But I'm like, for most folks, I'm like, God damn, how would you be able to handle that? How would your mental health be affected? How would you cope? Well, you're going to reject everything you've just heard because you need to survive, you know? So,
Yeah.
I would like for that to happen. I think I would like for what you say to, because I was very shocked when you were like that candid on that panel, and you were like, I did some fucked up shit in the past. And I was like, you don't hear that from people.
Yeah, because and it's funny because like, and it's kind of sad. I agree with you in that like, and we as content creators miss this. If you are a content creator, you survived in the space for a while, you're definitely more resilient than the average human being, right? Like we deal with more abuse than probably a lot of celebrities do because we're plugged in more and dealing with our fans. But we don't have like publicists that go through all of our criticism and everything, right? You're like plugged in directly to a lot of your fan bases. So a lot of people don't have the ability to be that resilient, or they just like, and I wouldn't expect the average person to do this. It's crazy the amount of shit we deal with. But even on that panel, when I was saying things like that, like the very next day on another panel, like people were saying like, oh yeah, like I don't like Destiny because he was an abuser. It's like, okay, well, fuck you guys, I guess. Like, I'm sorry that like, 9 or 10 years ago, like I recognize I did some fucked up shit, but whatever. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just so unfortunate. When people say stuff like that, I'm like, bitch, if I looked in your closet, are you clean? If I looked in your closet, are you clean? Like, I hate the fact that people thought I had seen people who had done things to me, right? And they would get online and like act so indignant as if people could never change. I'm like, bitch, you out here yelling at people for some of the shit that you did. Like, how is that possible? But people would rather just throw stones and be like, I'm not that bad. I feel like just because they don't want to address the fact that they've probably done some terrible stuff themselves and aren't willing to admit it and don't want to be seen that way.
Yeah. And then that's even more annoying because those are probably some of the best people that you could actually see come out and own up to it, because then it, it sets the example, like, oh, this person that advocates for this, even they say they've made mistakes and shit before. That's part of the reason, because I talk about like consent and all that shit all the time. So I think that's a really important part of my branding. Like, hey, like I talk about this all the time, but I'm not trying to sound judgmental. Like I fucked up on all of the same shit too. In some ways worse than even most people might, just because of the position I'm in. So like, but it's not like I think that you're a horrible person or like that you're irredeemable or whatever. Like, we all make these mistakes.
Is there, so outside of like those conversations, anything else that you thought that people should do as individuals?
Yeah, something else that is so important, and I try to start off most of my adversarial conversations this way, is you have to come together and acknowledge some things that are just descriptively true of reality. If somebody is saying something and they're acknowledging a reality that everybody else is kind of vibing with, and you're like, no, that doesn't happen at all, and people know you're full of shit, nobody's going to listen to your message. Everybody's going to know you're full of shit. Yeah.
So you feel like people need to either like, I guess, concede a bit of ground in order to be able to find some level of understanding?
So you don't have to concede any ground on the prescriptive end where you're telling people what to do. You just need to acknowledge similar realities. You need to stop acting like things are like one common piece of advice I'll get or I'll hear people say is things like, don't ever flirt with a woman at work. It's rude and disrespectful. She's obligated to be nice to you. Don't do that. Don't do that. And it's like, if you've ever worked in service before, you know there are a lot of girls that give their numbers out to guys that flirt with them at work, right? Now, there are ways to do it and there are ways not to do it. But when you come out with just a heavy-handed thing, like it's like no girl likes it when people flirt at work with them. Well, if you've had experience with that, you're going to ignore every single thing that person says because you know that right off the bat they're full of shit. Because that's not true. Not every woman is like that, right? So I think it's really important sometimes to be like, okay, listen, hold on. I can acknowledge this descriptive ground. Like this is true. Like yeah, but I think we can do better in the way that we approach it. I think is a really important thing to do.
Yeah. I would strongly agree with that, and I think that's been the issue. I think it's been the divide with people with women in red pill. Like women, a lot of women like don't understand the red pill. I'm like, well, have you tried to understand it? Mm-hmm. Do you admit that any of the stuff that they say is true? And they're like, no. I feel like it's just toxic incels, and I'm like,
yeah. And it's so dismissive too, because like I can already see, because people will clip this because they clip every conversation I'm in, right? But people will take stuff like this, and I've seen them do it in the past, like, oh, destiny is so sad that men have such fragile egos that they try to rape women. Really good one, Destiny. Like, oh wow, I'm sorry that it hurts your feelings to get turned down by a woman so much that you think you need to fucking rape them. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, like this is so hyperbolic. Can you like turn the temperature down a little bit on some of the rhetoric? Christ.
Yeah, I think when I hear stuff like that, I just don't even respond. If people are going to be so disingenuous that they're going to make crazy hyperbolic statements like that have nothing to do with what I was trying to get at, then I'm just not going. I'm not going to bother. But I also question the integrity of people who pretend like dating and flirting and all these things are so simple and clear. I'm like, bruv. All these interactions are complicated. They're messy. There's a lack of communication. There's reading into wrong messages. Like, it's complicated. Stop sitting there like it's black and white. I've never understood that. It's never been the case for me. It's never been the case for me. The amount of, like, everyone brings, listen, you think you know somebody, but until you date them, you don't know shit about them. I don't know what it is about like relationships and fucking, but it brings out the true side of people you'll never see before.
Yep.
I've known people who like, I know this girl. I'm like, cool. Then I talk to her in private and we start to like get slightly romantic, and I'm like, this bitch is crazy.
Yep. I take that even one step farther, and I say, I don't actually think, and a lot of people try to say this, I don't think you're dating until you fucking live with them. You don't know what a person is like until you are forced to be around them when neither of you wants to be around each other. That's when shit gets really real. Because when you're dating, you don't live with each other. When you meet each other, you're not actually meeting each other. You're meeting each other's representatives, okay? Yep. And until you're forced to fucking live together, that's when you find out what somebody's really like. But yeah, I agree. Like, people reveal themselves in different ways. And people, it's funny because people will know some things almost intuitively or through experience, because like everybody's got stories of like, oh yeah, like I was really close friends with this guy. Then we were roommates in college. Now we hate each other. Or like we realized that could never work. But then they don't carry that same logic over to other parts of their life. Yeah.
And yeah. And I think that's the thing that people don't get. They're like, I know this person. I'm like, but you don't know what they're like behind closed doors. You don't know how that trauma affected them when they're their most vulnerable and they're most needy. Like, you don't understand that because you're their friend. As their friend, like, you're not going to see that as depthly as a romantic partner. I don't know what it is about people with romantic relationships, but the moment they get into them, I don't know if it's because of the insecurities and all the issues that they come up, but they just seem to come up so effectively right at that moment when you start to like, oh, okay, now I'm starting to see some shit.
Sure.
And I don't think anything compares. I think what you said about living together is definitely accurate because you're definitely going to see another side to people. But I think that's also what leads to a lot of friends of people who've done bad things to not be able to understand. Like, I know this guy. I'm like, well, do you know everything about him? Do you know what he's like with? He might be a great friend, but he also might be hella abusive to the people you know.
Yeah,
she might be a great teacher, but that bitch might grow up niggas at the club on the weekends. I've seen it. So just because you know them in a certain context does not mean you understand them in every context.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me when like somebody does something horrible, and like sometimes the people around are like, "What? I never knew that he could murder someone." Blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, no fucking shit. Like, what do you think? You're just killing people casually around like other types of people? Like, or when parents will say like, "Oh, my kid was a great kid," it was like, yeah, of course you don't see your child at their worst or whatever. You know, like people reveal themselves differently in different environments. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that pretty much covers most of the questions and stuff I had. Is there anything like topical stuff that you want to bring up in relation to this stuff, or things you wanted us to cover?
How do you feel like you have to struggle? I know you kind of mentioned this. How do you struggle like talking about topics like this without feeling that like it's a little bit too incel pilled with your audience? Or do you just say, fuck it, I'll do my best and you don't think about it much? Or how is your thought process with that?
Here's a problem. I think there have been moments in my life, especially when I've done this online stuff, where I'm like, I don't need to do all that. And I think I have crossed, and especially when I started off, bro, I was way more angry than I am today. I think because I've been able to vent it and finally talk about it on a platform and have people acknowledge the shit that I've seen and experienced, and I'm not made to feel crazy, I think I've let it go of a lot of stuff. Yes, there's some stuff that I've looked at that I'm like, you know, that was pretty extreme. That was pretty red pill. And I think where I'm at now as a 30-year-old, I don't feel the same way. So, yeah, I think there's some stuff like that. And I think I do struggle a little bit. But I try to live my life with some semblance of integrity. I try not to, and if I feel like in hindsight, like later on, I feel like, oh, I didn't need to do that, I'll just delete the video and be like, you know what, that was wrong, and I'll make another video that kind of shows the change of opinion that I've had. But man, I was angry for a long time. I was super angry, and I felt like my issues just nobody gave a fuck. So I think it came out at times when I would discuss certain things. And it still comes out sometimes, like, you know, like when people bring up some of this stuff and I keep remembering how I was gaslit and how I was made to feel insignificant for some of the stuff that I went through. And I'm just like, no, that's just real. And you're not going to convince me I'm crazy, but I get angry about it, and I just don't like that part of me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a pretty human experience. Do you drive?
No, thankfully I stay away from a lot of stuff.
Oh, you stay away from driving? Wait, what is that supposed to mean?
Well, I happen to live in a city where I don't need to.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I had a really bad experience way back, so I kind of just stayed away from it.
Oh, damn. All right, gotcha. I'm sorry. I was gonna bring up there's this, I guess, I don't know if you ever had this before. There's this weird phenomenon where like people will say that like white people can't be mad about anything because they're or men can't be mad about anything, or wealthy people can't be mad about anything because they're already in a position of power in society, or they've already had everything. So now it's time for other people to get their comeuppance. Have you, there's a weird phenomenon where if you're ever sitting in traffic and not paying attention that well, if the light turns green and you're not going, when everybody else starts moving, you actually get a physical feeling in your body that your car is rolling backwards. Have you ever had this happen to you before, or maybe not?
I don't know if I've had the feeling of going backwards, but I get angry at the idea that someone's stopping me from moving forward.
Oh, sure, okay. I'm more talking about the feeling like if everyone else is advancing next to you and you're sitting still, the feeling that you have is that you're actually falling behind. And I think that this same feeling kind of encapsulates a lot of like men experience or other types of majority group experiences in society, where it's really great that there's so much representation now for other types of people and other conversations that we couldn't have about, like, you know, sexual assault and all that are happening. But if you like totally push off the other groups to the side and just tell them to shut the fuck up, that they had their turn and now they're going to have to deal with everyone else getting their turn, I think it leaves everybody to feeling like really shitty. And I think that's a really common human experience that everybody should be able to empathize with.
Yeah, well, I think it creates a little bit of an us versus them environment, and as a result, it's like, well, I'm on team B and you're on team A, so we're not fucking talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I've had to humble myself, because I'll be honest with you, there's way more money for me to make if I just went full red pill.
Same, yeah. People still call me grifting and shit. It was like, dude, what the fuck? Like, damn, especially depending on like, like if you're a minority and you're like doing certain opinions, like you can get fucking banked depending on what side of the or what your story is. Yeah, bro,
I've rejected some like liberal ideas, and people are like, oh, you're going for that fuck, and I'm like, bro, I know how much money is there. If I wanted to go down like the conservative Hodge twins route, like, it's so easy. I would make, bro, I would be a multi-millionaire. It would be crazy how much money, but it's just not in line with my values. So I'm not gonna do that. But I don't know how we got on this topic specifically, but just to bring it back, I'll try to as best as I can. I personally think it's not only important to, I guess, stick with those values and have those difficult conversations, even if you get like chirped at from both sides, but it's also to be able to acknowledge, like, when are you leaning a certain way, and are you leaning a certain way for the right reasons? Or are you doing it because the crowd is pulling you there? And I've had them pull me sometimes, and I'm like, nah, I'm not going down that road. Yeah, I've said stuff where I'm like, hey, I don't agree with this policy. I'm like, well, fuck, man, you're a Trump supporter. I'm like, what? Okay, we're going to move on from this. That's why I think the political commentary is just not for me at all.
Yeah, it's pretty cancer on all sides.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Do you have any other stuff that you want to bring up? I thought it was an interesting question. Yeah, I struggle with that a lot, honestly.
Not that I can think of offhand. What,
cool.
Do you guys, is this like do you talk about this a lot on your channel, like this kind of stuff, or what is like the bread and butter content of your?
We definitely talk, like a lot of our content is more humorous. Thankfully, it breaks a lot of the tension because I can't do serious stuff all the time. But the bread and butter, we'll talk about like men's issues and we'll talk about certain stuff like that. But we'll also talk it from a tempered standpoint, you know, and try to have messaging that is not deeply red pill, but also acknowledges some of the struggles that they have. And yeah, I think thankfully it gives us a bit of a balanced viewership. You know, I'm not like at a point where it's like 90-10. You know, I'll take 75-25. I'll live with that.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the bread and butter would be like things that men go to. And you know what frustrates me about that is sometimes I talk about this stuff and women are like, why don't you ever talk about like what women go through? I'm like, do I look like I got a vagina? Like, do I look like I could draw from like empathetic experiences? Like, I don't know what y'all go through sometimes, you know? I can only I know what it's like to date a woman. I don't know what it's like to date a man. So I agree that men probably do a lot of fuck shit that I can't see because I'm not one having these conversations with you to understand what they're doing behind closed door. Because like I said earlier, even if you're best friends with him, you may not see how he's engaging with his dates or his stuff all the time. So I don't necessarily know. But I do have like lots of experience dating women, and you know, I think that's what I draw upon to kind of have these conversations. So it's a frustration I have because I get that criticism all the time, and I'm like, well, I don't know why that, I don't know like the nuance of it, you know? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I can understand, yeah. It's once you've learned some things from experience, I think if you're intelligent, you get a little bit wary talking about things you don't have experience of because you realize like how many pitfalls there could be.
Yeah, it's like I feel like a woman can get up on here and talk about what it's like to get prepared to go meet a dude and like the struggles of that, and like, you know, like I remember Jenna Marbles had this video about like being drunk and doing your makeup, right? And like all these women went fucking crazy for it. Like, I understand, and I was just like, I don't get this whatsoever. Yeah. But of course I'm not gonna get that, you know? And I think a lot of the struggles that women deal with when it comes to like things that men might do, like some of it I just don't see. So it's not me being like purposefully obtuse and being like, well, fuck you guys, y'all don't go through shit. It's just like I don't understand the depth of it, so I can't give you like really valid commentary on some of it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, as far as the bread and butter goes, that's some of the stuff, but yeah, I just talk about shit that I feel more comfortable with. So if I walk outside of that, I can kind of feel it, and I'm like, I'm not that good at this, so I probably should reel it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was good. That was good. I think the chat enjoyed it, even if some of it was kind of wild. It was good for me as well, and it gave me a lot of ideas. So I appreciate that.
Cool. Well, thanks. I appreciate the conversation. If there's ever anything that comes up, shout at me. Let me know. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, keep enjoying your stream, I guess, and we'll definitely be chatting. Yo, you do the bad D&D, right? Are you in just one campaign?
Yeah. Right now I am. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I might think of trying to see if I can start up another one. And can you link me to your campaign if you have any online streams? Because I use a tabletop simulator and shit like that too. So it's a bit more of a 3D experience. But I
think we use Roll20 if you've ever heard of it.
Yes, I've heard of Roll20. Okay, cool. So yeah, the 2D tokens and stuff like that. Have you been playing in person a lot before?
Never played in person actually.
Okay. Yeah, I play online mostly, but for me sometimes I just struggle with like 2D stuff where you just click a button and numbers appear. I prefer like seeing like physical dice and shit like that. But I'll send you a link to like some of the streams that we've done with tabletop simulator. If you think that shit's decent, then let me know.
Yeah, sure. All right, cool. Well, thanks a lot for the conversation, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, cheers.
All right, have fun. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
Number 1 victory royale. Yeah, Fortnite, we about to get down.
Shut the fuck up, you fat bitch!
Wait, can they hear me?
I have no idea.
I revived
Fucking mom too.